This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
17 seconds from Game 7 or from championship number 6. Jordan, open, Chicago with the lead! Timeout, Utah. 5.2 seconds left. Michael Jordan running on fumes with 45 points.
Well, I guess it depends on what generation you're in, but the conversation of greatest of all time, yes, there actually is a conversation for some people, but not for me, and probably not for my partner tonight, Mike Noto. We're talking Michael Jordan's final game, the 1998 NBA Finals, Game 6, Bulls and Jazz. Do you have that discussion, Mike? Is that a legitimate discussion? Is there somebody that's on the level of Jordan?
There's no basketball player on the level of Jordan. You may have players like a Kobe Bryant or players like a LeBron James that may have characteristics similar to Jordan, but there's no one that's been able to put everything all together like Jordan has. And to me, there is no debate that has any merit when you're talking about the best NBA player of all time. And if there is, it's not LeBron.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we're going to dive into Mike's last game here tonight on Distant Replay. Hit us up on Twitter at Distant Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're using as well. We'll try to have a new episode out every single week for you, going back and looking at old games. We're also on YouTube as well. Check out our channel there. Just search for Distant Replay Podcast. You'll find us there. And you can always shoot us an email at distantpodcast@gmail.com if you have anything on your mind. And keep the comments coming on YouTube. Appreciate the thoughts from people that are watching those videos and giving us some feedback as well. So tonight's game is the 1998 NBA Finals. I mentioned Game 6, Jazz and Bulls. The date was June 14th, 1998. Location was the Delta Center in Salt Lake City. Mike, where were you?
I was still living in New Jersey at the time, and it was a Sunday night. I remember that very vividly. And I was glued to my TV in my living room.
You know, we have a lot of these I was at home stories. We've had a lot of the same time frames, but this is a different one for me. I was in Brownsville, Texas, my friend. I was me and a buddy were going to play in a golf tournament down there, like a junior tournament. I have an uncle that lived down there. He has since moved. He didn't really care too much for Brownsville, which is right on the border of Mexico. I don't know if you've ever looked at a map of Brownsville, but it's literally right on the other side of the Rio Grande from Mexico. So we were there playing in a golf tournament, staying with him, and just kind of having some fun. We were at a restaurant when this game was on. We were keeping an eye on it there. So I do remember this game vividly. Huge Jordan fan growing up, as I'm sure you and just about anybody that grew up in that era, unless you were diehard for another opponent, it's hard not to pull for Michael Jordan. So that's why we wanted to dive into this one tonight, especially ahead of his documentary that's coming out, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. We wanted to go ahead and hit this game, which is his final game, his walk-off from the NBA. So let's set the scene, Mike, and I want to start with the Bulls because this is really the end of the dynasty. Jordan's second three-peat here, but there's a lot going on with this Bulls team.
Oh, there sure was. So for those of you not familiar, like Ben said, they're going for a second three-peat. So you had the 3 championships, then you had the 2 years where Jordan went to play baseball, and now we're back for a second three-peat. So this is the third of the second three-peat, and you have before the season, the Bulls front office led by Jerry Krause, who was he was team president or general manager, but he was the head of the basketball operations, pretty much saying if Phil Jackson goes 82-0, he's not coming back the next season. So you have that backdrop along with Michael Jordan saying he's not interested in playing for any other coach other than Phil Jackson. So you have that backdrop coming into the season, and as if that wasn't enough, Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, the second and third best players on this team, are to be free agents at the end of the season. So you have all that as a backdrop heading in to this season and to this playoff run. And watching it in the moment, you didn't know what was going to sort of unfold in the following months. but you were pretty sure this was the last time you were going to see all, let's say Phil Jackson, Jordan, and Pippen all together. So you made sure you were watching it, as evident by the fact that this is the highest rated NBA game in history.
Yeah, this kind of took me back to the moment. That's a good kind of explanation of what we're getting into, and it kind of sets us up here because I'd kind of forgotten about a lot of that. I'm sure many people have that remember this game but don't remember everything that was happening with the Bulls. It's kind of took me back to the time, too, of Rodman. You mentioned him being a free agent. He wasn't around the NBA much longer. This is kind of towards the tail end of his career. This is when he really started going off the rails, too.
Yeah, there were signs in this game of him sort of doing some zany things, and I think you made reference to that documentary. That's one of the things I'm interested in is how during this season they sort of kept him under control enough to be able to get him to the end of the season, because he did some stuff in this game that was head scratching.
Yeah, you can say that for sure. And you look at this season, setting it up to get to this game, the Jazz have been really good for 2 straight years. This year they actually had home court advantage in the series. And they both these teams won 62 games. This is a year after the Jazz and Bulls met previously. So this was like, we think about the Jazz during that time, and we remember Malone and Stockton, obviously. But, I mean, this team was, if it wasn't for Jordan, probably wins 2 championships.
It was very fitting to me that they played the Jazz here in what would be Jordan's last game with the Bulls, because I thought during this whole run, this Jazz team – these last 2 seasons gave the Bulls the most run for their money. And I thought it was Jordan's best opponent in terms of talent as well, because you had a legendary coach in Jerry Sloan and 2 Hall of Famers in Karl Malone and John Stockton, who unfortunately, they were very good players, both members of that first Dream Team. The one thing though, that not that they're known for it, but them never being able to win a title primarily because of Michael Jordan, like you said, they have the most playoff appearances ever without a title. Malone's 1 and Stockton's 2. So if you saw these guys play, that's not what you think of. But I think looking back on it, these are guys that are known for, hey, second best team for 2 years when Jordan was around, and it led to them not being able to finish the job.
Yeah, so this went to Game 6. The Bulls, they had a huge win in the series. Game 3, they won by 42 points. I don't remember that, but they had a 40-point win in Game 3 of the series and had looked to be able to close it out in Chicago, but Utah went in and won Game 5 by 2 points. In that game, Kukoc had 30. And I remember Kukoc. I especially remember how he kind of took over when Jordan left, but I forgot kind of how good of a player he was. It reminded me of seeing that box score from the game before, but also watching him in this game. He was kind of ahead of his time in the style of player that he was.
Yeah, just a very skilled European player. I mean, I'm trying to think of a comp for him, but very tall, lanky, good shooter. Mixed it up a little bit. Back then, we're right when Dirk Nowitzki's entering the league, and European players had a rap of not being real physical, hard-nosed players. Although he wasn't as skilled as Nowitzki, he sort of had a little bit of an edge to his game at least, and he was a very good shooter, very smart player, very good passer.
Yeah, and another backstory on this series. In the playoffs, the Bulls, as good as they were just 4-4 on the road in the playoffs, and they were heading into 2 games potentially in Utah, Game 6 and Game 7. This is back when they did the 2-3-2 series format. So that's kind of
Utah, Ben, which was a very tough place to play.
Yeah, it was.
That was what it was known for, as being a very, very tough place to play.
And you saw that in this game. Great energy from the fan base from start to finish. So let's look at the rosters here. We touched on it a little bit, but let's run through them. The starters for your Bulls were Jordan, Kukoc, Ron Harper, Scottie Pippen, and Luke Longley. Dennis Rodman wasn't a starter in this game.
Nope, he wasn't. This starting lineup, and when you look at it, the thing that sticks out right away when you're watching is, oh, wow, I forgot Rodman didn't start.
Yeah.
But, you had just a bunch of role players that accepted their roles, and Pippen and Jordan. And that's what this run was sort of all about. They had guys filling, as much as the front office didn't see eye to eye with the coaching staff and the players, and there was a lot of strife, at least they built a team the right way and found guys that fit well around Jordan and Pippen.
Yeah, you had Rodman, Steve Kerr coming off the bench, Scott Burrell, Judd Buechler, which I'd totally forgotten about about him. I know you probably haven't because of his ties since then, but him and Bill Winnington, another player that I'd long forgotten. But yeah, the ultimate role-playing bench right there for the Bulls, no question. On the other side with the Jazz, you had Karl Malone, obviously, Bryon Russell, Jeff Hornacek, you had John Stockton, and Adam Keefe was the starter. I'd forgotten all about Adam Keefe.
Yeah, so did I, and his performance was very forgettable in this game as well. He looked so out of place, didn't he?
Yeah.
It was just very strange. And on the bench for the Jazz, how much did they talk about Antoine Carr in this game?
Yeah, you would have thought like he was the player of the series, the way they built him up. And I guess he had a big game the game before to get them to this position. Probably without him, they wouldn't have been there. But yeah, I mean, it was all that. That was the main part of the pregame storyline was Antoine Carr's role and would he start and play more this game?
Yeah, it's like, can someone tell Isaiah look, Isaiah was a great player. And I know we'll get to it in a second here, but he's an awful announcer. But, it's like, can someone tell Isaiah that, if the Jazz win or lose an NBA Finals game, it's not going to be based on Antoine Carr?
You don't play
a deciding game. You think it's going to come down to Antoine Carr?
I love it. That's hilarious. Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, I guess maybe, if he had a big game, played like he did in Game 5. I don't know how you justify it, but yeah, we'll hit broadcast in just a second. I got some thoughts on there as well. But that's your rosters. Down the bench for the Jazz, you had Carr, Chris Morris, Shandon Anderson, Howard Isley, and Greg Foster. A lot of guys that I'd forgot about too.
So as a Knicks fan, the two guys I remember from that bench are Shandon Anderson and Howard Isley, because the GM for the Jazz during this time was Scott Layden. And when the Knicks really started to turn the corner and become terrible was when Scott Layden was their GM, and his two big free agent signings were his two buddies from Utah, Shandon Anderson and Howard Isley.
Oh, big signings. How
fired
up are you?
Franchise changing in the worst possible way.
Hey, to give Isaiah a little credit here, Antoine Carr was +9 in this game, second best on the Jazz roster. Okay, so when he was out there, he was making an impact. Your coaches for this game, as you mentioned, Phil Jackson on one side, then you had Jerry Sloan on the other side, who was the longtime Utah Jazz head coach. He actually played for the Bulls for the majority of his NBA career and was a coach for the Bulls as well, so you had a tie there. But Sloan was a solid coach.
Oh, really, really good NBA coach. He lasted a long time. He coached like the Darren Williams Jazz teams. Didn't Darren Williams make him quit or something like that?
He coached 88.
Jerry Sloan quit out of nowhere because of Darren Williams? He didn't get along with him?
I don't remember how it all played out, but yeah, he coached 88 to 2011. I mean, how many coaches do you see coach through 4 decades? I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, he was a legendary Bulls player. I mean, he might not have been the best player they had before Michael Jordan in their franchise history, but he was in he might have been in the Mount Rushmore of players for the Bulls before Jordan got there.
Was he that good?
Yeah, a guard. Yeah, and he was there for a long time, like you mentioned.
Yeah, he was. Cool. Yeah. That's cool. But yeah, a little bit of backstory on the coaches there. So broadcast, moving into the broadcast, NBA on NBC, love it. Always great to hear that those chimes. Bob Costas, your main play-by-play. Doug Collins, 2 solid starts. Then you got your boy Isaiah, and he was about 3 or 4 years out of the league at this point, and pre-head coaching Isaiah Thomas, but he didn't really shine in this game.
No, he didn't. So I'll get to Isaiah in a second, but my thoughts on Costas is if he's not the best ever to do it, he's pretty close. But I thought it was very interesting the other parts of this announcing team. You had Doug Collins, who was the head coach of the Bulls before Phil Jackson, right? You had Isaiah, who was a bitter rival of these Bulls teams in the 80s and early 90s. And then you had Ahmad Rashad, who was one of Jordan's best friends. So you had all these guys within the 3 of the guys in the broadcast had, direct ties to Jordan and to these Bulls teams in one way or another, which I thought made it interesting. And of course, we have your guy Jim Gray, who just seems to wiggles his way into all these big games. And Isaiah was pretty bad. I mean, it's some guys are just not meant to be announcers and not meant to be GMs and not meant to be coaches and not meant to – was he an executive for the CBA? And not meant to be executives. Isaiah was a really, really good player. And unfortunately, I think at this point, he's just as well known for the stuff he tried to do once his playing career was over.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about those connections to Jordan, but yeah, you're spot on. That is dead on. And I'll echo your statements on Costas, because we don't really get Costas basketball anymore. Ever since we moved away from NBA on NBC, he's been much more of a baseball guy, especially in recent years. Done some Olympics, been really good there. But man, he was really, really good to listen to in this game. I mean, I think about it quite a bit, but this game, more than any others we've done so far, it's our 14th episode. I mean, I think this was by far. I mean, not even like we've had some great announcers too. I just think by far this was the best game call that we've had.
He could weave stories and storylines into the broadcast. Whereas now all the storylines and the kind of behind the scenes stuff going on with the teams, it's discussed in the pregame and postgame shows or by the sideline reporters. He was able to weave that stuff in the middle of the game as the action was going on. It was incredible.
Yeah, go back and watch this game for Costas for a lesson on play-by-play. He was amazing for sure. So that's pregame. Let's move into the game, Mike. Big game, obviously, last game for Jordan. I was really anticipating seeing this game over again because this is really, again, in our wheelhouse in terms of our age and, transitioning from high school basically to college just about. But let me start with pregame. And I'm going to, again, share the link to the video so you can go back and watch it. It's in our show notes, which you can find at distantreplaypodcast.com. But you go back and watch the pregame fireworks show. I don't know who put this together, but that had to be the loudest pyro of all time because every shot they had of fans and players, they had their ears covered. Did you notice that?
Yeah. And like I said, that was a wild arena back in the day. Utah is still a very good NBA, it's a very good NBA city there in Salt Lake City. And I noticed Kerr with his hands over his ears, and even the Jazz players who knew what was coming and played there all the time with their hands over their ears. Did you notice that the Jazz's intro music was the same as the Bulls from this time period?
I didn't pick that up.
I mean, how could you have the same intro music as the Bulls?
Yeah.
And that's one of the major things this Bulls dynasty was known for, was that awesome introduction they had, and the Jazz just completely rip it off.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I mean, we all remember that Bull. I can still picture that Chicago Bull going through town and whatnot. That was pretty awesome. But yeah, I did not pick that up, but that's a good observation. I don't know why that would have been the case for them. But diving into the game now, underway. Jordan, first points, first bucket in this game was a fadeaway. Jay really just kind of I missed that shot, man. I miss seeing he just had a style of play, and we kind of saw it from Kobe a little bit. Kobe kind of mimicked his style of play and a lot of his moves and shots, but nobody did it like Jordan. And as soon as he shot that first, Jay, and I saw it again, I was like, man, this is fun to watch this again. Yeah,
the ability to adjust, right? All the good players in NBA history and in sports history, they adjust their games as time goes on, and that's what separates them. You look how great LeBron's been. He's changed his game as he's gotten older and gotten even better, you could argue. Kobe, same way. Kobe kind of did it the same way as Jordan did by adding, a post game and a jump shot game more so than early in his career. And Jordan with his post game, with his pull up jumpers, like you said, it was so pure and so awesome to see.
Yeah. Luke Longley, although he started, got 2 early fouls, and we saw Rodman early in this game, and we ended up seeing him often. I mean, he played almost 39 minutes throughout, and we'll talk about him a little bit more as we go through. But, the big story early on in this game was Scottie Pippen. And, on the Utah side, you had John Stockton battling his back injury a little bit. But Pippen, same way, early on in this game, he had to go to the locker room because he was in such pain after catching a pass underneath the basket and taking it up. And then he came down wrong. They caught his reaction and tweaked something. But he went to the locker room early, and that was a big part of this game.
The Pippen back injury was a major, major, major storyline in this game. And I honestly had forgotten about that.
Me too.
Just how big of a deal it was. And then later in the game, the Stockton injury became a little bit of a bigger deal as well, as that impacted him more. And, it's a shame we didn't get to see vintage Scottie Pippen in this game, but he definitely gutted it out and gave it all he had. And I thought that was a big boost to them just to even have him on the court.
Yeah, they referenced that as well. But, I don't think many people think back to that game and we think Jordan and we think the way this game ended. But, yeah, I mean, I don't remember at all that Pippen was off the court for long stretches of time. I mean, I was kind of surprised going back to the box score that he actually played 25 minutes, which is about half the game, but it felt like he was out for a long time. I guess he just was able to position himself and just kind of stay reserved when he was in there. He only took seven shots total, but his impact was felt, as you mentioned. He was plus 16 this game, Mike, for the Bulls in just 25 minutes, which was by far and away the best plus minus for a Bull in this game. Even Jordan, who was only plus 2. So shows you the impact he had, but we hit that early on in this game, and it became something they talked about throughout, and rightfully so. That first quarter, though, Chicago jumped out on top, got out to a big lead. Utah battled back, and we kind of got a sense, much like the way the previous game had gone, that this game was going to go back and forth. It was a game of runs early on, but Malone was, man, he was good. I remember Malone, but he was tough in the paint.
Yeah, I mean, he tough in the paint, added a very good face-up jumper game during his career, and this is vintage Karl Malone at this time period. He was just a spectacular player. And he, like you said, in this game in particular, he sort of came out firing and was good the whole game, but got off to a very quick start. Very physical game. It's the first thing you notice when you watch this, how much more physical the game was back then, how different the rules were back then as opposed to today.
And one rule that got called a lot was defensive 3 seconds. Malone caused a ton of problems defensively for the Bulls as they were shifting and helping. And that got called. It seemed like that first quarter or first half, there were so many whistles as the Bulls were trying to get settled defensively.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, because back in the day in the NBA, they had the illegal defense call, and you couldn't play zone like you can now in the NBA. So now in the NBA, you have defensive 3 seconds. Back then, you had illegal defense, which basically meant you had to play man-to-man, and if you got too far off of your man and weren't guarding anyone, so if you weren't going to double team someone and you're just sort of hanging out in the lane, you could get called for a technical foul. The first one they gave you for free, and then after that, it was a technical foul if you did it again. So in total in this game, the Bulls had 4 illegal defense calls against them, which led to 3 technicals. They're not technical fouls against an individual player, just on the team as a whole.
Yeah, and it was called quite a bit in that first quarter. But while Karl Malone was really the big story, he had 12 points at all 4 of his field goal attempts. Jeff Hornacek also had a really good first quarter, much more so than Stockton, who kind of struggled a little bit, a little tentative. Really was kind of a non-factor early on. He kind of disappeared, honestly.
Yeah, he did. He would show up big time in the second half at times for sure. But we're at 25-22. The Jazz, like you said, come back from being down early, and they go into the first quarter with a 3-point lead.
So we move into the second quarter. This is when Jordan really began to take over for the Bulls. Again, Scottie Pippen out in the locker room. He didn't play at all in the second quarter, and Jordan was vintage in this quarter, scoring 15 points, going 6 of 11 from the field. The Bulls only shot 16 field goals in the second quarter. Jordan had 11 of them. Kukoc had 4, and then Judd Buechler of all guys had the other. So that was it. I mean, it was pretty much go down the court. Let's find Jordan. Let's let him take the shot.
At the end of the second quarter, Jordan had 21 going into half. Malone had 20. The Pippen injury, like you said, was a major storyline again, because this is at the point now where he's actually going in the locker room to get treatment on his back. Isaiah making the comparison to when he got hurt in '88 against the Lakers in the final, which I actually thought was the one good comparison Isaiah made the whole game. Because that was, I don't know if you remember that back then, Ben. That's when I first started following the NBA. And Isaiah had an ankle injury in Game 6 against the Lakers in a series that it looked like the Pistons were going to win. And it totally flipped the series and the Lakers won. But anyway, you have more illegal defenses in this quarter, like we talked about. You have Ahmad Rashad actually reporting on the air that Pippen told the trainer that he didn't think he was going to be able to play.
Yeah, that was a big one. I thought the other big thing for me out of this quarter, and this happened a couple times, but huge missed call on a shot clock violation against the Jazz, and one which they threw up a kind of a bit of a Hail Mary 3-point attempt there, and it got off. And I thought, even in real time, I mean, to me in real time, it didn't even seem that close. I believe was it Howard Isley that shot it? I don't remember.
It was.
Howard Isley shot it. He hit it. It's a big 3-point attempt, but it was waved off for a shot clock violation. And this is back then. Dick Bavetta made the call, and this was back then when they didn't go to the replay.
Yeah, missed shot clock related calls played a huge role in this game. As we'll get to later, the second part of this. But this one, I mean, I know people don't like replay because they say it ruins the flow of the game. But this is a classic example from NBA history where it was very, very clear on the replay that Isley let go of the ball. And I don't know. I did not remember that two calls involving the shot clock played such a huge role in this game.
Yeah, and this one was big, and because it was a 3-point, it ended up being, obviously with the score at the very end, you'll see that this was a huge, huge part of this game, and it could have swung the game one way or the other. But even a replay in that situation is one where you just run over the scores table. It's pretty clear, black and white. That ball is released. You make the call. You move on. That's the benefit of the replay. There are times, sure, that we get worked up over how long it takes and how many times they go over there. But situations like this, I mean, Utah would love to have that call back. And it just, to me, was just so blatantly. I mean, it was close, sure. But when he shot it, I didn't. It wasn't one of those where I was, yeah, that's a shot clock violation. I thought immediately, man, he got that thing off and hit that. That's crazy. And then you hear Bavetta's whistle blowing, and he's running down the court, waving it off. And that was a huge, huge turning point. And this is part of the reason why I think Sloan had to coach his tail off in this game, because I think he kind of knew what he was up against and had to continue to work those officials. But he was up and down this court and on these officials all game. And, this only added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, because you bring up a great point about Sloan, and I actually forgot to mention it before. But a lot of times with these illegal defense calls we talked about before, that was sort of the head coaches for the teams trying to set the tone for the game and pointing it out to the refs early. That was a big part of the NBA gamesmanship back in the day. And that was a lot of the reason why Sloan was so active in the beginning of the game. He wanted to set the tone that the Bulls weren't going to be able to sag off and play illegal defense. And you also mentioned he was just trying to everything he could do to will his team. A very, very animated on the sidelines.
He was. And I thought the other part of this in terms of officiating and just kind of gameplay, I thought there was a lot of flopping in this game, both from Malone, from Hornacek, from a number of different guys, but it just felt more so than usual. And I know it was physical, and you mentioned that. And I think that was true in many cases. But to me, it seemed like the Jazz were trying awfully hard to get every single call they possibly could in this game.
Yeah, and one thing you notice in the game as a whole, I agree with what you said about the Jazz. There was just huge periods of the game where there was no pace and rhythm to it. And I think a lot of it has to do with what you just mentioned, which everyone trying to fight for every last inch, and it leading to very physical play, and it leading to, the offensive sets and everything becoming a little bit disjointed.
Well, at halftime, it was Chicago down just 4 points. The Jazz were up 49-45 heading into halftime. Still had question marks about Pippen. Jordan was coming off a pretty good first half, 23 points, right on his jersey number. Costas, of course, was correct to point that out as he was heading to the locker room. But a pretty good first half in general. But let's move to the second half.
Ben, before we do,
yeah,
hate to interrupt you, but did you notice the name of the Chicago Tribune reporter that
yes.
Bob Costas quoted in the middle of the second quarter?
I have that in my outdated notes.
I will
Go ahead.
save it.
No.
I will save it.
Okay.
You want me to save it?
Let's save it. Yeah, let's save it.
Okay.
We'll save it for postgame. I absolutely
Blew my
caught
mind.
that. It blew my mind too. We'll save that to the end. Stick with us. Let's go second half, Mike. And third quarter. We had Pippen return. He was limited, okay? But how bad was the third quarter in terms of basketball?
Awful. And this is another one of these things that gets sort of swept away with time. In this quarter, it was the Jazz outscored the Bulls 17-16. You're not hearing that wrong. 17-16 in a whole quarter. This is when the physicalness of the game, especially between Rodman and Malone, ratcheted up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Pippen can barely jump at this point. I don't know have you ever hurt your back before, Ben?
No, not significantly, no.
Okay, so I have. And when you hurt your back, you are careful about every move you make.
Yeah,
because you don't want to hurt it again or hurt it worse. And that's what the mode Pippen was in, where he was constantly being very measured about his movements. And like you said, this quarter looked like a completely different game they were playing than the second quarter that had a lot more rhythm and movement to it.
Yeah, and Jordan was off. I mean, nobody had a rhythm in this quarter. Malone had 5, Hornacek had 6, and you had Jordan with 6. Those were your top scorers in this quarter. And Pippen came back. He was just 1 for 4 in the quarter. Rodman hit both of his field goals though. Rodman did make an impact, and I think this is the quarter he hit that jumper from I think maybe the elbow, right around the elbow. No, everybody gave him the shot. Nobody respected his offense.
No. There were some things to respect about Dennis Rodman's game, but his outside shots were not one of them. And heading into the fourth quarter, something of note is that Jordan was 1 of his last 9 from the field entering the fourth quarter.
And this is a big part of the story too, because I mean, the legacy and the legend of Michael Jordan. He always found another gear when nobody else could. Whether it be the flu game, times when other guys would fade is when Jordan seemingly found another level and found a way to take it up another notch. And that was the same in this game, because you mentioned the 1 for 9. They talk about it going to the quarter because Pippen's been out. Jordan's had to carry much of the load on this team. He already did anyway, but without Pippen even more so. And fatigue was a big question. I mean, even dating back to the previous game where he went quite a bit and did not have a good game 5, how would he finish? And early on, you kind of had those doubts, and we know what happened, obviously, but you kind of had the doubts in the moment, okay, he's missing a lot of shots. Things are coming up short. His shots are coming up short, fatigue related. How are they going to be able to finish off? It seemed like the Jazz were in a pretty good position at that point.
Yeah, like you just hit it perfectly. While you're watching the game, you're like, man, Jordan had a pretty bad end of the third quarter. But then your mind sort of clicks back and says, well, this is Michael Jordan. And what made him special is how he came out right away in the fourth quarter. And this is coming off of a season where he played more games and more minutes than any time in his career. This is his 13th year in the league. The announcers bring that up. They bring up the fact that, is he getting tired because of the way he ended the third quarter? And he comes right out and scores 8 of the first 13 points for the Bulls in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it's legendary.
Like on cue. And that's, to me, what separates him from the LeBrons, from the Kobe Bryants, is in these big spots, he seemed to never come up short. Whether it be from a series standpoint as a whole, his teams were 6 for 6 in the finals, or just these little individual games where everything was on the line and he seemed to always come through.
He has the ultimate clutch gene. I mean, that's the bottom line. Is this guy? I mean, I can't. I'm sure he's failed times, but when it mattered most, I can't think of a time that he came up short and let himself down or let his team down. And that was the case again. But you mentioned got off to a quick start. They were down 5 heading into the fourth quarter, and again, much like what we saw in that first half with the 3-point shot getting waved off due to the shot clock, the opposite happens again against the Jazz in favor of the Bulls. Ron Harper hits a big shot as the shot clock expires. And again, in the moment, I thought, he didn't get that off, but they give it to him. And that tied the game at 79-79. And you're thinking, man, that's a 5-point swing in this ball game on 2 relatively clear, but if it happened now, moments would be a big difference.
And Costas, of course, in his greatness, was right on this.
I know.
He was right on it. He was on it post-game. He was on it. He was so on this 5-point swing and how important it was. When you're watching it, you sort of forgot about the Howard Isley issue at the beginning of the game. And he was right on it, bringing it up, how big of a deal it was. And look, that shot by Harper with 3:39 left, made it 79-79.
Yep, it tied it up. And I quickly will go back a step when you talked about how bad that third quarter play was, and this fourth quarter was much better. But I thought it was funny too. At one point, Costas said, and this was I think in the second half, that this is one of the higher scoring games in the series. They're at a much quicker pace. And I was thinking, I mean, look at the score right now. This is I know you make fun of college basketball and 65, 63 games that you see all the time right now, and this is why a lot of people have lost interest. But that's kind of what we had in this game for a long time.
Yeah, and when it all has to do with the rules. I'm telling you, with the way the freedom of movement of players is a lot more allowed now in the NBA. And when you hear these coaches sometimes say, oh, well, the game was called this way, the game was called that way, and make a big deal about the refs. This is part of the reason why they do it, is because it impacts a lot.
Yeah.
And that's why these games were not high scoring, is because of how physical it was allowed to be. These refs, I thought, the 2 shot clock violation calls were really bad, obviously. I think there was even more times where the Bulls were an illegal defense that they didn't call. I don't know if you caught the charge call on Rodman with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Where he caught the ball coming off of a jump. He caught the ball in midair off of a jump. Didn't even get a chance to land. Stockton slid in front of him, and they called the charge on Rodman.
Mm-hmm.
Little things like this. The refs in this game did not have a good game.
Yeah, I agreed. And down the stretch, let's go final couple of minutes here, is really back and forth, but the Jazz were able to hold off the Bulls for the most part. The Bulls kind of stayed there. Jordan hit all his free throws. Again, clutch down the stretch. You get to that final minute. Jordan makes a couple of free throws, ties it up, and then right back down the court, John Stockton, who, again, did not have a very memorable first half, but it seemed like maybe he was saving that for the end, hits a huge three with 41 seconds left to put him up by 3. Crowd's going crazy. Chicago takes a timeout. And again, it's like, man, the Jazz they could not be in a better position right now.
Yeah, and Stockton, give him credit, because he was not great in this game, but did not hesitate at all taking that big 3-point shot. And Stockton, this shot obviously in this game is forgotten, but he did hit a 3-pointer. I believe it was the year earlier, a game-winning 3-pointer to send them to the NBA Finals, the clinching shot in the Western Conference Finals. This was a guy who was not afraid to take a big shot in his career. And like you said, at this point in the game, you're like, all right, maybe this is the time where the Jazz can hold on.
That's what you thought, but that was not the case. Jordan came right out of the timeout, hit another layup. And I thought what was crazy, man, is Jordan and Bryon Russell did a pretty good job, and for the series, I think, did a pretty good job on him. But Jordan juked him out of his jockstrap almost every time they had the ball, man. That step to the right got Bryon Russell every single time, it seemed like, in that second half. He would just take that step to the right, cut left, and drive, either draw a foul or get a basket, seemingly every time. I kind of started feeling bad for Bryon Russell, especially knowing what was about to come his way.
Yeah, exactly. And to defend Bryon Russell, he's not the only one that happened to.
No.
That jab step and like you're saying, that move crushed everyone. And like you said, the crowd's going crazy. We have a timeout. We come out of the timeout with 40 seconds left. Jordan drives right to the hoop and makes it a 1-point game with 37 seconds left with no resistance whatsoever.
None, right to the basket. And I think arguably maybe the greatest play of one of the greatest plays of Jordan's career, especially on the defensive side, away from any kind of game-winning baskets, happens on the next possession. He sets it up perfectly. They'd been going down to the post every time, or most of the time, to Karl Malone. As this guy was trailing away from the play along the baseline, Jordan kind of pulled up and hesitated, knowing that ball was about to come into the paint. And as it was dropped in, he was right there to strip it away for the steal. And just, again, to show you what Jordan meant to his team every time. Not only is he scoring every basket, but he makes this play, which gave them the opportunity and put them in a position to win. Because pretty good feeling, though, Karl Malone probably gets some points there, gets to the line.
Yeah, so this was back in the time period where if you had a post player or a good perimeter player, when the game was on the line, they got the ball. Nowadays, the game's a little bit more predicated on sharing the ball. Back then, everyone in the whole gym knew Karl Malone was going to get it. And like you said, had he gotten it, the odds of him either scoring or getting fouled were pretty high. And this is one of the more underrated plays of Jordan's career and of NBA history because it gets lost a little bit. He smacked the ball away from Karl Malone.
Yeah.
He didn't smack the ball away from some little scrawny backup guard. Okay? Karl Malone might have been one of the strongest human beings I've ever seen in my life. He smacked it right out of his hands. And then now, he's got the ball coming back now with a chance to win the game.
And he does that. It's the play that we've seen and the play that you hear at the top of the show. But whether or not it was a push-off, he gets his opening. Russell stumbles a little bit. Jordan pulls up from about the free throw line and, of course, does not let us down, buries that shot. And again, Bob Costas is right on it and really capturing the moment. Hey, if this is his last shot ever, he's going off in a special way.
Bob Costas, like you said, I was have that in my notes in capital letters, that he nailed the call of that play and of the, and subsequently after, talking about the aftermath of that shot. This would be Jordan's 44th and 45th point of this game. And remember, they're down 1 at this point. It's not like it's a tie game. You couldn't have any more pressure on you than he did in that spot. And it was one of those times where you knew when it left his hand, it was going to go in.
So awesome.
He was just that kind of player, and it was awesome.
Yeah, it was so great to see. So the Bulls capture their 6th championship under Michael Jordan, and they do so with an 87-86 win in Utah, Game 6. And I was surprised looking back on it, especially looking at all the games that they had referenced and all the previous championships, that the Bulls never went beyond Game 6 in any of their championships, which kind of speaks to how good they were in that time period. But they played some really good teams, and to never get pushed to that Game 7, man, I would love to see Jordan in Game 7.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We didn't get a chance to see him in Game 7s in the finals. He did have some in the Eastern, coming out of the Eastern Conference over the years. But, he beat good teams. I mean, he beat a Magic Johnson Lakers team. He beat a Drexler-led Blazers team. He beat a Barkley Suns team. He beat the Stockton and Malone Jazz twice, and he beat the Sonics with Sean Kemp and Gary Payton once. So it's not like he was playing chump teams in the finals either. And like you mentioned, they always got it done, never had to come to a deciding Game 7. And that's getting back to Jordan's legacy, 6-0 in finals. Whew. And there's no other, unless you want to go back to, a Bill Russell. He even lost some final series, but he won, 10, I believe. But Jordan, just in the finals, was a 6-time finals MVP and willed his team when he needed to every single time.
Yeah, and if he doesn't leave basketball, I mean, what are the odds that he wins 8 straight? I mean, that would be the favorite, right? For him to win the 2 that he missed.
What about this? What about we could have seen the Jordan Pippen Bulls against the Kobe Shaq Lakers?
That would have been something.
Who knows what would happen with Phil Jackson? Probably never would have went to the Lakers in that scenario, because Jordan said he wouldn't play for anyone else. But still, it's big. That's a big what if. Yeah,
let's keep them going. What ifs? What if the shot clock violations don't happen? And this, I think, it's not something we talk about now. Well, this moment we do, but those were just such 2 big, clear calls that had a direct impact on the score. I mean, that was 5 points that went in favor of the Bulls, and probably Jordan finds a way to make up those 5 points if he has to, but that was a big swing.
Yeah, that was huge. I've never even heard anyone talk about those 2 shot clock violations ever, and I've heard people dissect this game a lot over the last 20 or so years.
Yeah,
but the impact was huge.
The only other what if I have is what if Jordan doesn't get that steal there and play defense along with his offense, and he had, again, a huge game, scoring 45, but that defensive play seals it. And I would not bet against him in Game 7, but you're still talking about a situation where you're still in Utah. All the momentum is in the favor of Utah, having won 2 straight at that point. Assuming they lose that game, I mean, there's still nothing to say that they don't find a way to tie it up. It's only a 1-point game at that point. But if they do go to Game 7, you still have Pippen, too, on top of everything else, very questionable on his status. So, I mean, that had to be the play that happened. They needed to stop. It was that situation where they had to have that play in that moment, and he got it.
Yeah, and there's certain series that have played out like this over the course of the years where you have a feeling that the team that's on the road, it would be in their best interest to close it out 6 games because a lot of the momentum switches towards the home team into Game 7. And again, it's just even Jordan being aware of that in the moment, that, hey, I'm going to put the pedal to the metal and close this out now. They did the same thing to the Suns when they beat the Suns in 6 on the I believe it was, who hit that shot at the end of the Suns game? Was it Kerr or Paxson?
I think it was Paxson, yeah.
Paxson, yeah. Just the presence of mind in the moment is something that he just had in spades. And one of the other what ifs for me, sort of going along with, hey, what if they got to play Shaq and Kobe, is what if all parts of this organization just got along? How long could this have gone, realistically? Assuming they re-sign Pippen and Rodman, and they bring Phil Jackson back, and they bring Jordan back, obviously. It's a shame that this dynasty was ended by – part of it, I think, was the strike or the lockout. The next year was the lockout in the NBA. And part of it was just a bunch of guys who I think were together for so long that they kind of got sick of each other.
Yeah. Because it seems like they could have plugged any, like they had so many big guys, right? So many big men. They just kind of circled in there. They'd always find a new role player or two that they needed to be a shooter. And I mean, as long as you had that nucleus, those three guys, Phil, Pippen, and Jordan, I mean, they're going to be a favorite every single year, it seems like. Yeah, I mean, I don't really think about that much, but that's a great point on what could have been. I mean, I guess I just always have just appreciated what we saw, but thinking about how much more they could have gotten out of that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, you know, I think people don't think about it, and I don't think about it that much until you're watching and realize how awesome it was that these guys weren't slowing down at all. So why did it end? Is like I said at the beginning, you sort of knew it was coming to an end here. It was sort of well known that this was going to be it. And then when you compounded that with the lockout to begin the next season and the shortened season, it was kind of the perfect storm that led Jordan to retire and led Phil Jackson to leave the Bulls.
Yeah. Post this game, these two franchises gone a couple different directions. First, post Jordan years, for the Bulls, it has been ugly, man. I mean, you think about how great the Bulls were. They've almost been the opposite since then. I mean, I feel bad for, Knicks fans have it worse, obviously, but Bulls are not too far behind. They've only won 5 postseason series. 5 series they've won since Jordan. That's incredible.
Yes. Yeah, so they tried to do the rebuild the right way. If you look back, they got a bunch of picks, a bunch of top 10 picks. So from that perspective, they executed their plan the right way. They just picked the wrong guys. So they picked Eddie Curry and Tyson Chandler. They had some really bad luck with Jason Williams, the Duke Jason Williams, with the motorcycle accident. You just had a bunch of things to kind of go sideways in the rebuild. And yeah, this organization, other than those Derrick Rose years with Joakim Noah and Tom Thibodeau, those were the only really bright spots since the Jordan era.
Yeah, Jazz have been decent. They've never been quite at the level they were with Stockton and Malone, but they've been to one conference finals. That's it since this game, and that was 06-07. So their success has been very limited as well. They've had some flashes of being back, but for the most part, this franchise has just kind of been slightly above middle of the pack.
Yeah, like you said, they've had spurts where they've been really competitive. Like one of those teams where it's like, oh, the Jazz, they're pretty feisty. They got some good pieces, but they've never been a championship contender. Even their team now is like that with Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. Very, very competitive, very hard. They play hard, but you know they're going to be in the playoffs, but probably aren't good enough to win a title. Those kind of teams.
Right. Well, let's finish on outdated, Mike, and then what we referenced earlier. I'll let you take over. Was it first half it was mentioned or early second half? But Costas mentions, was he talking Jordan? He was talking Jordan, right? Or was he talking?
It was a quote. It was a quote basically about Jordan's greatness, essentially, and that of course Costas in his wisdom, you know, he sort of
of all the guys he picked out,
and he gets the quote in right in the middle of the game. Like right just as game action's going on, he quotes a Chicago Tribune columnist named
Skip Bayless.
Unreal.
I about lost it when I heard that. Like we think of what Skip Bayless has become. He's just become a personality that you don't know how much of what he says he believes. But to see how respected he was, that he gets referenced by Costas in an NBA Finals, Jordan's final game, is like night and day from where we are.
Unbelievable, right? And I obviously knew Skip Bayless was a writer, but I thought he was his main part of his career. He was in Dallas. Maybe he was and just was with the Chicago Tribune for a little while, but just unbelievable. Like, and you know, this is going to be a topic of conversation next week when they start talking with this documentary. Once the internet hears Skip Bayless's name mentioned, everyone's going to lose their mind.
I know. A couple other outdated notes. Now that you got me thinking about it last episode, I noticed MSNBC promo plugging their sports part of their website, and I actually logged on to MSNBC when I saw that. They don't have sports coverage on there anymore at all.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on. Did they want MSNBC to be a sports channel at one time?
It wasn't the political channel it is now.
Yeah. And there was never an NBC Sports network or specific network until recently, like in the last 10 years, right?
Right. Yeah. The other one I had is the reference Costas made as, again, Costas' storytelling, was Rodman and Malone are on the court tripping each other up in a big moment too, that I think I still remember how that one happening, because these guys were going at it so much, but they were tripping each other back and forth until finally Rodman gets called for a foul. But then Costas references a wrestling match, and I'd forgotten these two hit the ring, but they wrestled in a WCW match a week or two later.
Yeah, in July. So we're June 14th at the NBA Finals here. These guys are tooth and nail at each other's throats the entire 6-game series, and less than a month later, they're working in conjunction at a WCW match, wasn't it?
Yeah,
something like that.
Crazy.
It was Hogan and Rodman, Hulk Hogan and Dennis Rodman versus Diamond Dallas Page and Karl Malone.
That's wild. That's wild. But that was the case. Do you have any other outdated?
No, I had that one as my outdated.
You stopped at Bayless.
I had that circled and underlined. I couldn't believe that. I looked it up the second he said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have anything else. The only other thing I had for an outdated observation was, did you happen to notice, number one, the Jazz's uniforms are awful.
Yeah.
Their old uniforms are so much better. I think it's the ones they wear now again.
Mm-hmm.
And did you notice Steve Kerr's sideburns?
No, I didn't.
Dude had chops, man. Go back and look. At borderline chops, like pretty funny. But he looks exactly the same.
Kerr didn't have much of an impact in this game. I was kind of surprised by that. I thought he was a little bit more of an impactful player than he was, and I guess he more or less had his moments and his big shots. But
what about this? What about this for an observation, Ben? 35.89 million viewers for this game.
Woo, buddy. Yeah.
For an NBA game, go back and look at the NBA ratings from last year's finals.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then come back to me and tell me that LeBron is like Jordan.
Yeah.
Everyone watched this game. Everyone. It was a Sunday night. That has a lot to do with it. Uh-huh. But you had Jordan playing with a lot of people didn't know if it was going to be his last game or not. And when I saw that number, I was shocked at how high it was.
Yeah, me too. Well, that's going to wrap up the show. Let's quickly hit the reason why we wanted to get this game in now is because of the documentary coming up on Michael Jordan, The Last Dance, the untold story of the Chicago Bulls, and I'm looking forward to it. I know everybody's pumped about this. ESPN, thank you for moving it up. They were originally scheduled to run it in May and into this, or maybe even later into the summer, because I guess probably post NBA season to fill some of the time up. But they decided to move it up because of all the sports being off right now. And now we get a 10-part documentary series. We got parts 1 and 2 starting on Sunday, April 19th. And I cannot wait. At 9 o'clock Eastern is when it begins. It's going to be on each of the next, 5 Sundays they're going to be airing it. And both re-airs a week before going into the new show. So it's going to be great, man. I'm pretty pumped about this.
Yeah, it's going to be an awesome documentary. Like you said, it's going to be 5 Sundays in a row, 2 hours each Sunday, episode 1 and 2, this, the first week, 3 and 4, and so on. And, oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what direction that they go in. And supposedly it's going to be like an unfiltered look. Like you're going to hear them cursing and yelling at each other, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is awesome.
Yeah, we're going to try to do some special episodes, some kind of reaction thoughts on the documentary as well as we move forward. So be on the lookout for those. Hit subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. We'd appreciate that as well. Leave us a review. Also on YouTube, same thing there as well. We'll have every episode logged and uploaded on YouTube. And check out the website, distantreplaypodcast.com. We have show notes plus a link to this game and every game we talk about in its entirety as we watch it, so you can go back and do the same thing. All you got to do is throw it up on your TV. The YouTube app's perfect. You can typically stream it on any smart TV now, so you can just grab the link and go ahead and stream it on whatever TV. So it's a perfect setup as well. And follow us on Twitter, Distant Podcast. All right, Mike, that's it, man. Great game, Jordan. It would brought back some great memories of our youth and watching the great one once again.
Sure did. It was great going back and watching this one, and I'm looking forward to the next one.